Welcome everyone. So I'm David and I'm going to be talking about Encapsulated Django, keeping your apps small, focused and free from circular dependencies. So what I'm going to talk about in this talk is first of all what encapsulation actually is. Secondly, I'm going to talk about making a contract with yourself about encapsulating your Django project. And finally, I'm going to look at some tactics about how you might do that. So first of all, a few questions. What is encapsulation? And also, how might it relate to Django? So this is a bit interactive. Does anyone have any idea what encapsulation might mean to them? Is it, I mean, a show of hands, who's even heard the term? Okay, great. So loads of people know the term. Who thinks they know what it means? Okay, so about half the people. So there's a few different definitions, but essentially the way I describe it is it's an object-oriented programming concept, which is sort of kind of about putting things into separate boxes, like capsules. This is actually from Wikipedia. It's the packing of data and functions into a single component. Now, for Django, any idea what that might... Oh bother. How do I do this? We're back. So for Django, the way I think about encapsulation is, it's sort of my own definition, but it's to split up your project into lots of small apps, and those small apps have specific responsibilities, and also that they have no circular dependencies between the apps. So like I'm not really sure if this is how everyone thinks about Django, or if this is an unusual way to think about it. So out of interest, could you put up your hand if this is a familiar idea to you at least? Yeah? So lots of people. And how about, like, can you put up your hand if you always do this? Okay, interesting. So I mean, I didn't know if I'd need to persuade people or not, but my feeling is that maybe we like the idea of doing this, but maybe we don't do it because it's a bit difficult to work out how to do. So that's what this talk is about, is some of the ways I've worked out how to do it. So this is a diagram of an encapsulated Django project. It's got several small apps, and there's a flow of dependencies. So you've got the settings file at the top. That knows about stuff at the project level, and it might configure your apps in certain ways for your project. Underneath, the settings module will know about all these other apps. But like this app here, it doesn't know about any of those other apps. So any app that's higher up, it won't import anything. Any app that's lower down won't do any imports or know about any models or anything like that from your apps higher up. So that's what I mean by no circular dependencies and having a dependency chain. It means that all the arrows are flowing in one direction. What I find usually happens with the Django app is one of two things. Either you get something like this. Put your hand up if you recognize this. It's really hard to avoid. You're like, oh no, okay, this model needs to know about this model, but this model needs to know about this model, and it's very difficult to avoid. And what you find happens sometimes is you might get an import error, and you're like, why have I got an import error? Oh, it's because this models.py file is importing from this app. This one's importing from this app. Okay, and the way I used to solve it was by going, okay, well, I'll put the import from one of the apps within the method declaration so that it doesn't cause an import error. I don't know if that means anything to anyone, but put up your hand if you know what I'm talking about. Okay, yeah, great. Okay, the other thing that can happen is if you want to avoid circular dependencies, you can end up with this. We have a really big app, and maybe some small ones, but this is quite difficult to avoid as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at some tactics for how to do something more like this. Are you excited? Great. Okay, so first of all, the first thing to do is to make a contract with yourself when you're doing your project that you're actually going to do this. It probably won't happen unless you make the decision to do it. What I've found is that the best way to make it happen is actually to document what you're going to do. And so what I realized is I found it difficult to remember which apps were dependent upon which. And so I figured out that there's a really simple way in which you can document the dependency chain, which is in your installed app setting. You just do them in the order in which you want to have the dependency chain. So I'll put it in a comment in case someone else is working with it as well. And any app that's higher up, it can know and import from apps lower down, but not the other way around. So I start with this, and when I create a new app, I'll put it somewhere in here. I'll think about where I put it in that list. And then if I'm not sure, I'll refer back to it. That works really well. A couple of other notes about this is I generally have two apps. I have a main app at the top and a core app lower down. The main app knows about all other apps. So you can kind of think of that as, it's a good app to say, maybe have your home page in or something like that, so that it's doing imports from everything. Usually it should be quite small, but it's useful to have something like that so you know where to put things. And at the other extreme, the core app is something where you kind of like put shared generic functionality that kind of is useful for the project but doesn't need to know about any of the other apps. So like, for example, I usually have a class-based view which sets the title of the page in the context, and I always use that. And so I'll import from that class-based view when I'm using all my views throughout the site. So yeah, use installed apps to document your dependency chain. The second thing about making a contract with yourself is what you don't bother doing, and that's templates. I don't personally think it's very easy and there's much point in encapsulating your different templates. Like, split them up into the folders, but I generally put all my templates at the project level, and I just import. Like I've got includes all throughout the templates. It doesn't seem to cause any problems to do that, and I kind of think templates are sort of a project level thing anyway. I mean, I'd be interested to know if anyone's got any suggestions about why you should do it, but yeah. So that's what we're going to try and do. Now, for the rest of the talk, I'm just going to give a few examples of how you might do it. So, encapsulation tactics. So this is one thing I've started doing, which is really simple but quite helpful. Rather than having a big model which has loads of fields on it, if I identify something which has a sort of subset of functionality, I'll do another app and another model, and I'll link to it via a one-to-one field. So here we have a parent model, and it links to a child model via a related name, and then suddenly you've got your you've got an API where you can get all those fields under the child attribute on the parent model. You can run all your methods, but all that is defined in the child app, and the parent app doesn't need to know anything about it. So an example might be if you've got like a job model, and you want to do some financial stuff about it and collect some financial field data and stuff. That's the kind of thing that can get quite complicated, and it's quite nice to split it into its own app. So you might do a job financial model and then just link to it via a one-to-one field. So that I find that works quite well. One thing about this is that you can use signals, and that's quite a good way of linking up things in the other direction than you normally would. So let's say you wanted to save the child model whenever you saved a parent model. You might be tempted to do this, override the save method, but then you've introduced a circular dependency. So a better way to do it is to use signals, which I imagine quite a lot of people use. But if you don't, it's just core Django. Have a look in the documentation. So this just knows when the parent model is saved, and then it will do something to the child model. So you can put that in your child app, not in your parent app, and it will listen to the stuff that's going on with the parent app. Now I'm going to talk about monkey patching. This is another approach. It's a bit more kind of hacky. There's all sorts of things you can do, and sometimes you can make your life a bit difficult. But I think this particular method of monkey patching is really useful. So let's say you want to have a method on your parent model, and you want it directly on there for various reasons. You can just add it in the child app. So this is an example. You import the parent model from the child app, then you define a method, which it looks like, I mean, it's just a function, but it looks like a method because it's getting self. And then you just assign it to the parent model attribute. It's really simple, and it's a good way of splitting that off to the app that's actually concerned about that method. Finally, I'm going to talk about providing custom APIs. And providing custom APIs is really enjoyable and satisfying. And it's a lot easier than you think it would be. So this kind of is the best way, I think, to encapsulate apps, is you make APIs within your parent apps, and then the child apps can hook into them. So there are a few techniques. One of them is using settings. Another is imitating the admin site and using a registry. And finally, there's polymorphism, which I'm probably not going to have time to talk about, to be honest. So here's some examples about settings. So let's say I've got my child model, and I'm linking to the parent one via this one-to-one field. So we've got this attribute you can access stuff on via the parent model. So I've just made up a setting name called plugin names, and I've just put that, it's a tuple, and I've just put it in my settings.py. Then in the child, I've defined a method on the child model. It doesn't really matter what it does, but it is returning something. Finally, in the parent model, we've got some kind of method, and this is where we want the child models to hook into. So all I do, I import the setting. Can people actually see this? Yeah. I import the settings.pluginName. I loop through them, and then it doesn't exactly matter, but I'm just calling that method off any child model that's been put in that setting. It's like 2 lines of code. It's so simple, and it's a really good way of like making a little API and splitting it off. Another example, it's really easy to define settings like middleware classes where you define a string and it links to a class. It's really easy to do that with settings. You just use the import string function, and you just give it the setting, and then you've got the class. Really easy. So you could define a form just in settings as a string, and then in the parent view, import string settings.pluginForm, you've got an overridable form class in your settings. Another example, this always foxed me for some time. It was like, if I've got like a parent app, usually the parent app will be in the URL scheme. You might want it to be sort of at a higher level. So like, let's say, going back to the jobs thing, you might want it to be like jobs/1 for the job, and then maybe like have jobs/1/payments or something. But it's a bit difficult to work out how to hook that payments URL into the job one without the job app knowing about the payments. I don't think I've explained that very well, but some of you might understand what I'm talking about. Anyway, so this is just an example of how you could make a setting where you define the URLs for certain apps, and then in the parent app URLs, you just loop through that setting, and include the right URLs for child apps in that URLs for the parent one. Some of you will be excited by that. Some of you probably won't know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to get a show of hands in case it's all of the latter. Okay. Finally, I'm going to talk about registries and imitating the Django admin. So we're all used to using the Django admin. If you think about it, the Django admin's really good giving you all this functionality about apps that it doesn't know anything about. So you can use that as something to imitate. And the way I do it is, so here we have an example of how you might do it with a Django admin. So one thing you do is you have an admin.py file, which gets automatically discovered by Django. Then you subclass a model admin and put some settings on it. And finally, you register it. So this is an example of something that I might have done. I've called it custom plugins. It's a bit of a weird name, but so again, all I'm doing is I'm importing custom plugins, which is a registry, and I'm importing the custom plugin class, which I'm subclassing. So here, in the child app, there's a custom plugins.py file. I import all this, and it's basically a pretty similar sort of pattern to the Django admin. So, I mean, that's like nice and tidy, but you'd probably think it's quite a lot of work to do. But actually, that is all the code that's needed. So you use Django class registry, which is a contributed package. And it's really nice. It's really small, but it's really good. And that gives you a registry class. So in the init file, I've specified custom plugins, which is a registry. I've also defined a class called custom plugin. That's like basically like the base class of a model admin. Think of it like that. And then finally, all the rest of this, all this is just for this last line. Who's used custom app configs? Okay, so most people know what this is. Basically, this is just have a look in the documentation. But this is a way of running something once all the models are run. So you just do your ready method. So, and then you just use auto-discover modules, custom plugins, and then that will look for any installed app, and it will import it if it's got a custom plugins module in the app. Really nice and tidy and useful. So finally, like how might you use this registry? So this is in the parent app. We've got a method here, and it just imports the registry, and then it just loops through it and finds out what's on it. Doesn't really matter about the particular way in which this is done, but you can basically do anything with it. It's just a way of storing stuff so that your parent app can then find out configuration information about certain models or whatever. Finally, polymorphism. I'm not going to talk about this really. It's just something to think about. So I had a website I was doing which had different kinds of jobs, and you'd post a job, and it would try and match that job with people. But there were different kinds of jobs, and there were some shared fields, and there were some specific fields. So, for example, the driver job had some special things about like your vehicle type and things like that. So what I wanted to do was have an app for job, and then separate apps for all of those. And what I did is basically made a registry where I registered these different jobs, and then the central job app could then treat the jobs as if like they were all the same model, but actually they had certain things which were specific to them. That's a whole other subject, but it's just something to think about. That's another good way of encapsulating your apps. So I've gone over quite a lot of things. Let's just summarize. First of all, I really recommend Believe. You can encapsulate your Django project. It's really satisfying. It's a really nice architecture. It just makes life so much easier if you put the initial effort in. Once you've committed, document it using installed apps and the order of the apps in there. Don't bother encapsulating templates. And some tactics. Split your models up using one-to-one fields. Consider monkey patching. And finally, make your own APIs using custom settings, registries, or polymorphism. So, any questions or experiences you'd like to share? I think we've got a microphone somewhere. Here we are. Do you want to go? Cheers.
Hello, hello. Right. Thank you for the talk. I am relatively new to this, so do tell me if I'm talking nonsense. I think in most Django tutorials or books, they refer to the app as something that owns the whole user journey, the whole user experience, with a user interface, with a controller layer, and the model, and so on and so forth. But it seems to me that the way you talk about apps is more similar. Well, it's similar to, for example, a package in Python. So it doesn't necessarily provide all the functionality all the way up to the top. So is my understanding correct?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, you can kind of do what you want. All an app is really is just, I tend to think of it as a fairly bite-sized collection of models, views, a URL config, and some forms, usually. There might be a few other things. So, I mean, I definitely think of them more like a package, but like packages that are quite specific to the project. Does that make sense?
I was wondering if there's any easy way to solve the circular imports in celery tasks. So from me, anytime I have a circular import, it's in celery task, because you import the task in the view where you want to call it, and you also import the model there, but then you also want to load the model inside the task. And so anytime I use celery task, I always have imports inside the function. So I was wondering if there's anyone who knows how to solve this.
Well, I might be wrong, but I think if you encapsulate things so that you've got a dependency chain, then I don't think that will happen. It might be that you've just got circular imports in general throughout your project. But I might be wrong. We could maybe talk about it afterwards in more detail. But unless anyone else has an answer to that question. No. Let's talk about it afterwards. Any other questions? Cool. Oh, yeah, one more.
You've hello. You've put your URLs, your templates at the top level. What about your URLs? Are you gonna mush them out, or do you think it's better to have like this API where things register to be sub URLs of URLs?
So what I do is I have a project level URLs.py that it just includes the URLs for all the various apps. It's just if you particularly wanted your URL scheme to have some URLs that like were below another app's URLs. It's just a way of like including them within a parent app. Does that make sense? So yeah, I'd put them in the project and then have a URLs.py for each app as well that gets included in somewhere.
Okay, perfect. Any more questions? Okay, perfect. Thank you, David.
Cool. Thanks.